One of our subscribers named Venus shared this story, and the night her phone lit up at 11:51 p.m. was the moment she realized her father's legacy was about to be stolen. It was 11:51 p.m. in my Chicago apartment when the email arrived from my mother, Jennifer. The subject line was one word: workshop. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. The message was short. Venus, Kevin and I have decided we're selling the workshop to his investors. I need you to sign the papers releasing your co-ownership from your father's will. This is for my future. Betrayal. Cold and immediate. Before I could even process it, another email appeared. This one from a law firm I didn't recognize. On behalf of our client, Kevin Doyle, we are authorized to offer you $10,000 for your full and immediate release of all claims. $10,000? For my father's entire life's work? Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family, especially when someone threatens the legacy of a person you loved? Tell me in the comments. I want to know if anyone else understands that feeling. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't even feel anger. Just clarity. This wasn't family drama. This was attempted theft. I ignored the $10,000 insult. At 12:03 a.m., exactly 12 minutes after my mother's email, I was on the phone with Robert Chen, my father's oldest friend and the family lawyer. It went to voicemail. I didn't hesitate. Robert, it's Venus Morgan, and sorry for the hour, but it's happening. They're trying to sell the workshop. They're in breach. My voice was steady. Activate the artisan clauses immediately. Freeze all transactions and assets. I'm on the first flight to Maine. I hung up, opened my laptop, booked a one-way ticket from Chicago to Portland. Then I opened my encrypted files. They made a critical mistake. They thought I was the daughter who left, the architect who escaped to the city. They forgot who co-signed the expansion loan with my father when no bank trusted him. They forgot who studied every legal contract with him, who drafted the blueprints for the new wing, and who insisted on one tiny clause, the artisan clause. A provision stating the workshop could only be used for master-level custom craft. No mass production, no cheap replicas, no corporate scaling. It was a failsafe to protect my father's art from a world that valued speed over soul. I never imagined I'd use it to protect him from his own wife. They also forgot the last 3 years. After Dad died, my mother couldn't manage the finances. The workshop was 2 months away from a tax auction. I got the notice. I didn't call her, didn't lecture, didn't demand recognition. I wired $12,000 from Chicago. I've paid the property taxes ever since. They thought I was the daughter who left. They were about to meet the partner who never did. But the taxes weren't the real investment. That was just maintenance. The real number was $85,000. 4 years ago, right after Dad died, and just before Kevin appeared, my father and I started what he called the Foundation Project. The workshop had been built in the 1940s. Salt air had rotted the support beams. The roof sagged dangerously. Dad was a master boat builder, but he wasn't an engineer. I was. I flew home 3 weekends in a row, ran structural surveys, drew architectural plans, hired contractors, and paid every invoice, $85,000. It wasn't charity, it was partnership. I sent my mother the receipts. I thought I was protecting her future. I thought I was protecting our future. I was naive. I thought I was protecting the workshop from the outside world, not from my own family. The next morning, my phone exploded. Jennifer, my mother. I was in a cab leaving the airport, the cold Maine coastline flashing past the window. I answered. No greeting, just panic. Venus, what did you do? Robert Chen froze the accounts. Kevin's investors are furious. He's going to lose the deal. My voice stayed calm. I'm protecting what Dad built. What Dad built? She snapped. Dad is gone. This is about my future. You have your fancy life in Chicago. Why do you care? Before I could answer, the phone shifted. A muffled voice, then Kevin. You think you're smart, don't you? He slurred, his voice thick with morning whiskey. You think you can waltz in here with your lawyer?
That workshop is mine. Running it into the ground, you mean? I said quietly. You'll regret this, he snarled. You're going to get nothing. You hear me? Nothing. The call ended. I stared at the phone. The anger still wasn't hot. It was crystalline, precise. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. A Facebook notification. My grandmother, Susan, had tagged me in a post. It was from my mother, a public message on the town community page. It's just so sad, she wrote, when children forget who raised them, when they get so successful and cold-hearted that they would try to steal their own mother's future right out from under her. Please pray for us. We are being attacked by our own family. That was it. That was the moment the last thread of daughterly obligations snapped. She hadn't just chosen him over me, she had chosen him over my father's memory, and she had just given me permission to wage total, uncompromising war. I flew into Portland and met Robert Chen at his office. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was practically my uncle. He was the one who held me on his shoulders at the boatyard picnics. His face was grim, but his eyes were sharp. Venus, he said, sliding a thick document across his desk. You were right to call, and you were smarter at 19 than most people are at 50. He pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. The artisan clause. It's beautiful. The property shall be used exclusively for the purpose of master-level custom craft. Any mass production or sale of prefabricated goods shall be considered a material breach of this deed. Robert leaned back. Kevin Doyle isn't a boat builder. He's a kit assembler. He's been buying cheap fiberglass holes from overseas and passing them off as Morgan-inspired designs. He isn't creating. The validation was cold, sharp, and satisfying. So the injunction holds, I said. It wasn't a question. It holds, Robert confirmed. But to win the lawsuit, we need to prove damages, not just breach of contract, but the desecration of the legacy the clause was designed to protect. Then we need to do an audit, I said, my voice all architect, a legal audit. We drove to the workshop, my childhood home. I hadn't been back in 4 years, not since before Kevin. The house itself looked neglected, the custom trim Dad had milled himself, peeling, the garden replaced with gravel, but it was the workshop that made my blood run cold. Kevin was there, standing by the bay doors, a beer in his hand. He smirked when he saw me. The conquering hero returns. Come to see what a real business looks like? I ignored him, my eyes scanning the room. I felt like I was walking through a crime scene. Where is it? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Where's what? The lathe? Dad's workbench? The one he built from the salvaged mast of the Albatross? Kevin gestured with his beer toward a pile of scrap wood in the corner. That old piece of junk rotted out. Had to tear it out. Made space for the new finishing station. He pointed to a cheap particle board table stained with sloppy varnish. I pulled out my phone, not to cry, not to scream. I opened the camera. Robert, I said, my voice clinical, please, document. I began my audit. My father's hand-forged tools, the ones his father gave him, gone from the wall, replaced with cheap plastic-handled power tools. The pegboard, where he'd outlined each tool in black marker, empty. The beautiful exposed oak beams overhead, the ones I'd helped him sand and oil, covered in a thick, hideous coat of gray paint. And in the main bay, where the half-finished hull of a custom schooner had sat for a decade, my father's unfinished masterpiece, it was gone. In its place were 3 identical fiberglass motorboat shells, the cheap kits Robert mentioned. The air smelled of toxic resin and chemical solvents, not sawdust and cedar. This wasn't neglect, this was an extermination. He wasn't just running a new business, he was deliberately erasing every trace of my father. He's not just in breach of contract, I said to Robert, loud enough for Kevin to hear, I photographed the sloppy paint, the damaged floor where the workbench had been ripped out. He's committing fraud, stolen craft. He's using my father's name, Morgan Boats, to sell this garbage. Kevin's face went purple. You can't prove a damn thing. This is progress. We'll see, I said, turning to Robert. Get a full accounting. I want to know where every one of my father's original blueprints are, and I want to know where every penny from the sale of his tools went. I turned back to Kevin. You should have taken the $10,000. I thought the fight was about the artisan clause. I thought I was just fighting a con man over a breach of contract. I was wrong. It was so much worse. Robert called me that evening at my hotel. His voice was different. The steady, calm lawyer was gone. He sounded shaken. Venus. I found it. It's not just a breach. It's criminal. I sat down. What do you mean? The $85,000 restoration loan, he said, his voice tight. The money you wired 4 years ago, it never went to the contractors. Kevin intercepted it. I couldn't breathe. He stole it? He did one better, Robert said, his voice laced with disgust. He convinced your mother to pay the contractors from her own savings, telling her it was just a short-term cash flow issue. Then he took your $85,000 and used it to pay off his personal gambling debts. But that's not even the worst part. I waited, my knuckles white on the phone.
He used the cleared property, the one you had just invested in, to take out a new $85,000 business loan. He mortgaged your father's legacy all over again. But he can't, I said, my mind racing. I'm co-owner. I never signed anything. He forged your mother's signature on the loan documents, Robert said quietly. And Venus, the bank records show he tried to forge yours, too. They flagged the signature mismatch, which is why he had to go to a private lender. But the intent is there. This is bank fraud, forgery, larceny. The floor just fell out from under me. This wasn't about cheap fiberglass. This was a systematic plot to gut our family and sell its bones. How? I whispered, the word barely audible. How could she let this happen? How could she be so blind? I could hear Robert sigh. She wasn't blind, Venus. She was trapped. And that's the part that's hardest to understand, isn't it? We look at people like my mother, Jennifer, and we scream, how could you be so stupid? But it isn't stupidity. It's a psychological trap. It's called emotional dependency. When my father died, he didn't just leave a hole in her life. He left a void of validation. She didn't just lose a husband, she lost her entire sense of self. And then Kevin arrived, charming, attentive, making her feel seen again. By the time his mask slipped, by the time the drinking and the bad investments started, she was already in too deep. Her fear of being alone again was stronger than her fear of him. He isolated her, telling her family didn't care, telling her I didn't care. He made her believe he was the only thing standing between her and total loneliness. It's not weakness, not in the way we think. It's a form of learned helplessness. You become so convinced you have no other options that you just stop fighting. You become a willing victim, a co-signer to your own destruction, just to have someone to eat dinner with. I understood, but understanding and forgiving are two very different things. He didn't just defraud a bank, I said to Robert, the cold clarity returning. He preyed on a grieving widow. He targeted my family. Venus, what are you asking me to do? File it, I said. All of it. The breach of contract, the civil suit for damages, and the criminal complaint for forgery and fraud. Send the entire file to the district attorney. No more negotiations. The war had just changed, and I was about to end it. The final confrontation was set. Robert, the local sheriff, a man who'd known my father his whole life, and I pulled up to the workshop. They were there, just as Robert predicted. Kevin and Jennifer weren't packing, they were moving, trying to get equipment and 2 of the fiberglass boat kits onto a flatbed before the full injunction was served. They were liquidating the assets. Kevin saw us, his face already flushed from drinking, went dark, blotchy purple. You, he screamed, pointing at me. You can't be here. This is my property. I have investors waiting. This is not your property, I said. My voice was low and it didn't shake. I stepped out of the car holding a single folder. The sheriff stood beside me, his hand resting calmly on his belt. I have a deal. You can't do this. This is my business. Kevin shouted, moving toward me. It was never your business, I said, holding up the single document Robert had printed. It was his. I let him see the highlighted words. The artisan clause, the one my father and I wrote, the one you violated the second you brought this cheap plastic garbage onto his property. The injunction is absolute. You've been in breach for 3 years. Kevin's eyes darted to the sheriff, then back at me. He looked like a cornered animal, but before he could lunge, my mother ran from the house. Her face was a mess of tears and panic. She grabbed my arm. "Venus, no! Please, please, honey, don't do this." I looked at her, my face like stone. "We'll lose everything," she wailed, her voice cracking. "The house, the workshop, we'll have nothing. Kevin was trying to build us a future." "This," I said, gesturing to the cheap fiberglass holes, "is not a future. It's a desecration." "Please," she begged, clutching my jacket. "If you ever loved me, do this for me. Do it for your mother." That was it. That was the moment the air went still. I looked directly into her eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see my mother. I saw a stranger. "I'm not doing this to you, Jennifer," I said, my voice cutting through her sobs. "I'm doing this for Dad." I pulled my arm free. I turned away from her to the sheriff and handed him the second folder I was carrying, the thick one. "This is the court injunction, Sheriff, and this," I said, tapping the binder, "is the criminal complaint. It's the evidence of bank fraud, forgery, and the theft of an $85,000 loan." My mother's face went white. Kevin just stared, comprehension dawning too late. The sheriff looked at the top page, then at Kevin. "Kevin Doyle, you're under arrest for fraud and forgery." It was like a dam broke. Kevin exploded. He didn't just resist, he raged, screaming curses at me, at my mother, at the sheriff, calling me names. As the sheriff cuffed him and read him his rights, Kevin was still threatening me. "You'll get nothing. I'll burn it all down before I let you have it." The sheriff just pushed him into the back of the cruiser. My mother collapsed. She sank to the gravel driveway, sobbing a broken, empty sound. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. I turned my head and looked past her into the workshop. I just stared at the empty space on the floor, the oil stains and bolt holes where my father's workbench had stood for 30 years, the place where he taught me to use a compass, to respect the grain of the wood, the heart of the entire workshop, ripped out and sold for scrap. I took a breath. "Goodbye, Jennifer." And I turned around, got in my car, and drove away, leaving her there in the ruins. Kevin was convicted on all counts: forgery, fraud, and larceny. His stolen craft narrative, the one he'd carefully built in town, crumbled overnight. The local paper ran a story about the con man who tried to steal the Morgan Boatyard legacy. He was sentenced to 7 years in state prison. My mother, Jennifer, wasn't charged. Robert and I had argued, but in the end, the district attorney saw her as a victim of financial and emotional abuse. She was broken. With Kevin gone, the fog of her emotional dependency finally began to lift, replaced by a crushing wave of shame. She moved in with her sister, my aunt, and for the first time in her life, she started going to therapy. Our relationship isn't fixed. I don't know if it ever will be, but it's not gone. I spent the next month in Maine, not in the house, but in the workshop. The smell of chemical resin and cheap paint was overwhelming. I hired a crew, and we began the purge. We tore out the particle board tables. We stripped the gray paint from the oak beams. We scrubbed the floors, trying to erase the oil stains from his shoddy kit assembly. It was on the last day, while sweeping out a pile of debris from under the main floorboards, that my broom hit something solid. A loose plank. My heart pounded. I got a crowbar and gently pried it up. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth and nestled in a small custom-built recess in the foundation, was my father's tool roll. His hand-forged chisels, his custom-handled mallets, the marking gauge he'd made from brass and rosewood, the tools Kevin had claimed were rotted junk. He hadn't sold them. He just hadn't been smart enough to find them. I sat on the dusty floor holding the cold steel in my hands, and I finally cried. I looked around at the empty, clean workshop and I thought about my 11 years away in Chicago. For so long, I'd carried this heavy, sharp guilt about leaving. I told myself I was the cold daughter, the one who abandoned her family, the one who ran. But sitting there, holding my father's legacy in my hands, I realized the truth. We're taught that loyalty to family is absolute, that cutting ties, even toxic ones, is the ultimate betrayal. But sometimes leaving isn't an act of abandonment. It's an act of self-preservation. It's not running from something. It's running toward the only version of yourself strong enough to survive. I had to leave. I had to go to Chicago. I had to become a successful architect. I had to build my own armor, my own wealth, my own strength. I had to spend 11 years forging myself into a weapon so that when the time came, I could return and fight the war they had declared on me. My distance wasn't a weakness, it was my training. I stood up. I walked to the one workbench that survived, the drafting table my father and I had built together, the ink still sharp, the lines precise, and right next to them, I unrolled my own, a new set of blueprints, the ones I'd been designing in my head for a decade. The title block was simple: The Michael Morgan Institute of Artisan Craft. The workshop was quiet. It was no longer a tomb. It was a foundation. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please hit that like and subscribe button. But more importantly, I really want to know what you think. What is real justice? Is it punishment or is it restoration? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read all of them and I'd love to hear your perspective.